Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first Pivot podcast. So it's fitting because the Pivot project was very much inspired by Doughnut Economics and the Doughnut Design for Business methodology. So it's fitting that we're starting out with Erinch Sahan, who's the business and enterprise lead at Doughnut Economics Action Lab. Erinch, hello. Thank you for joining. Thank you. I know you had to squeeze in your lunchtime. You've squeezed meetings. You're the absolute busiest person I know. So thank you for making time to speak to us.
Thank you, Tim. I'm delighted to be here, and it's more a result of my terrible time management than anything more important than that. But wonderful that we're able to get this time together to chat through Doughnut Economics.
Well, and it's great to have you here. I really enjoyed. I said to you when we first met that I think the work that you're doing in Doughnut Economics on businesses and enterprise is probably some of the most important work that Doughnut Economics is doing, because it's working on those agents of change, isn't it? It's getting up close and personal with the businesses who yes, they've created so many of the problems, but actually they are the solution as well, aren't they?
They are, and I think, I mean, to jump straight in, I think what we're trying to achieve, and a bunch of courageous and innovative and bold people like yourself are helping in as a part of this collective journey are trying to do is, which on the one hand, we're trying to be incredibly pragmatic, because we're trying to ask ourselves, what is it that business actually needs to do and can't currently do? And then we're trying to ask ourselves, well, how do we redesign business in order to enable and unlock those sorts of ideas, strategies, investments, approaches that we need from the business world? So there's a deep pragmatism in that, because the starting point is action. How do we unlock the action? But the reason I say it's also a bit ambitious and courageous is that by questioning the deep design of business and saying, look, we could actually design this in a more effective and a more helpful, in a more transformative way, we're actually opening up the heart of our economic system and thinking, who does it really serve? What is it here for? And how do we make sure that the right priorities are driven?
And you taken the words right out of my mouth there, Erinch. It's getting to the heart of the economy is what this is all about. But we did jump in. So just to say, this conversation is really, we're going to pick Erinch's brains about all things businessy, transformation-y. It's a lot of this is based on the Doughnut Design for Business methodology, which is a toolkit that I and lots of other regenerative practitioners use in our work. We're not going to go over that. We're not going to go over the Pivot project either, because this is being done in preparation for a listening circle that we're going to hold next week with Pivot project. Oh, it's tricky to say, isn't it? Pivot project members, when we'll talk a bit more about what the Pivot project is. But Erinch is well founded here in being able to get to the heart of it. You know, he used to be the chief executive of the World Fair Trade Organization. He's got degrees in finance and law. He spent 7 years at Oxfam, founding Oxfam's Future Business Initiative. So when he talks about this work, you know that it's coming from a really well-founded place. And I've certainly found Erinch's talks recently particularly inspiring. He always manages to get right to the heart of it. And that, so I wanted to pick up that thing, that pragmatism and the imagination and the gulf between the two, because we know that to have that safe and just future that the Doughnut imagines, we can't have that future with businesses operating the way that they are. It's just incompatible, isn't it? And yet there seems such a long distance between where we are now and where we've got to get to. And I think this is what the Pivot project and what Doughnut Economics is all about, trying to understand how do we bridge that chasm. So how does it feel to stare into that space, Erinch? And how do you start to put in place as that bridge?
It's overwhelming. It provokes some fear. It provokes a sense of, strong discomfort and thinking, my God, we have a pretty established model of business, of structures of companies, of financial, systems that are locked into a very particular paradigm and a very particular way of doing things. So to even begin to question that, going, guys, this isn't serving us. It, whatever you might think about it's how appropriate it was last century, this century we have new challenges, we have new opportunities, and we need to move towards the actions, the solutions to get us there, to get us over the line. And we're going to need to redesign, rethink this. I find that scary, to be honest, Tim. I mean, and I've been thinking of why. I'm not sure if everyone does, but I find it scary, and I've been sort of reflecting on my own story because I was the first generation of an immigrant family, so I was the oldest child in a family that migrated from quite a poor part of Turkey to Australia when I was 6 years old. And we sort of scrapped and clawed to build a particular kind of life that is full of some level of security, some level of opportunity. And at that time, sort of late 20th century, as I was coming of age, as I was finishing, schooling and starting university in my career, that late 20th century was an era where, the battle of ideas had been fought and global shareholder capitalism had won. So to question that was almost unthinkable at the time. So I wanted to join the winning side. I joined the big corporate world, and it took a while for me to realize that actually this isn't fit for purpose anymore. It might have won a 20th century battle of ideas, but 21st century is defined by very different things. And it took a long time for me to conjure up the courage to really think I want to spend my career building the kind of business designs, building the kind of ideas, working with the kind of people that are going to transform the essence of our economy. So I still feel a sense of insecurity, a sense of lack of safety in questioning, the core tenets of this economic system. It's much more comfortable working with the grain of it, working with the win-win part, with the high return on investment for sustainability solutions, ignoring the bits that are hard. But I also feel compelled to sort of go at this with a level of honesty with myself that, hey, I've tried this for nearly 20 years. I don't think it works. I don't think we're going to get there within the parameters of the current financial system. So, while that's inconvenient, while it conjures a lack of security, both personally as well as collectively, in even questioning that, it also feels unavoidable.
And it is unavoidable, isn't it? We, for all that doughnut economics, circularity, sustainability, ESG, CSR, all these words are out there in the milieu. We're still going in the wrong direction. Emissions are still rising. I don't know if anyone's seen the temperature of the oceans recently. It's not happy numbers, is it? Circularity is even decreasing.
Yeah.
And there's so much conversation about this that it can be easy to trick ourselves in our little world that, oh, we know what to do, we know how to change it. And I think for me, that was the inspiration for Pivot, was to say, how can we know what the solutions are. And we'll talk a bit about them in a minute, but we know what the solutions are. We know how to be different and how to do business different. We know what regenerative practice looks like, but how do you make that push through so that it affects the wider world, and we achieve those social tipping points that we so desperately need if we're to avoid the worst of the environmental tipping points. But therein, for all that difficulty, this is the moment, isn't it? This is the time. This is a pivotal moment for humanity when we both need to change and will change. One way or another, we're going to change, aren't we?
We are, and yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head that there's been a lot of, I mean, you've been in and around sustainability and now regenerative economic thinking, etc., for over a decade. So have I. And my God, during that phase, how much enthusiasm and euphoria has built up, in terms of, yeah, we're on the right track. We're going to drive through these solutions. I can't keep track of all the sustainability events going on now. I mean, I used to be able to. 10 years ago, I could write down the main big ones I want to go. Now there's a new one popping up everywhere. There's new reports, new analyses, new approaches, models, ideas everywhere. And that creates a sense that, yeah, we're on the right track. We just got to keep chipping away at this. But that's not what the numbers tell us. The last 5 years alone, the same 5 years where we've increased our focus on sustainability, at least at a rhetorical level, and increased enthusiasm and buy-in in so many organizations. The last 5 years, we've used about as much materials on this planet as the entire 20th century combined. Circularity is in decline. This stat hits me pretty hard because circularity the last 5 years has become in mode. It's absolutely fashionable for companies and entrepreneurs and investors to talk about it, while actually proportionally less and less of the economy is circular through those last 5 years. So to me, it's unavoidable. There are ideas that we know business leaders want to pursue. We know people across companies want to pursue. We all want to move to circularity. We all want to move towards far more respect for human rights in supply chains, with communities, with workforces. But companies are held back. They're not quite able to make those investments and make those strategic shifts. And my obsession the last few years has been why? What's holding them back? And yes, there are lots of things holding them back. It's not just one thing. But we need to also look at the design of the company. So what is it in the design of the company that is preventing you from making that internal investment to redesign your core product away from single use to circular modular product design? What is it that's stopping you from building a deep relationship with the farmers in your supply chain to support them to move towards regenerative or agroecology type farming models that are going to pay at least a living income to smallholder farmers and living wage to farm workers? What's stopping you from entering those sorts of trading relationships? Yes, it is partly the design of your company. Your decision makers aren't able to make the investments, to make the strategic shifts, to be flexible enough with their margins, for instance, to make that shift. And we sort of ignore that. And that's the bit that I've really focused on, is saying lots of things need to change. We need better regulation. We need better leadership. We need cultural shifts and awareness across society and markets. We need different investment models. We need a whole host of things, but we also need to change the design of the companies so that the businesses themselves can get out of their own way and begin the transition that they know that they need to pursue.
And I think that's when you guys published the Doughnut Design for Business methodology, the thing that I was really taken with was the transformational emphasis. It's not enough just to have a circular service or a net zero product or an arm that's moving in the right direction. If that's not replicated and starting to scale and fractally change throughout the company, if we're not getting those core changes that we need to see, then it's co-opted by business as usual, isn't it? And so can you break down the core things that you see in enterprise design as needing to change, as leading the transformation?
I mean, ultimately, you work back from the decision makers, and I love asking people in business across different functions, whether they're in the R&D function or the procurement team or the product design team, the finance team, whatever it might be. Think of the boldest, most ambitious idea that was generated by you or by colleagues that wasn't able to be pursued. And when people feel safe enough to share that with you, they tell you, they say, look, we came up with the idea of actually having, a completely redesigned product that eliminates or designs out waste, or we had a new model for manufacturing, was going to cost more. Maybe the margin was going to be a bit smaller for a while, but that was going to be far lower carbon. Eventually, we were going to maybe even sequester carbon, or we're going to pay workers much more than a living wage, or whatever it might be. So you get these ideas up, and then you think, okay, what held you back? What was it that meant that you couldn't pursue that idea? And often it comes down to one of two things. One, the internal investment wasn't allowed. So it needed some kind of investment. Usually these are businesses that, if you look at the time horizon in which this idea was generated, they generated profits and paid dividends. But they chose to pay additional dividends rather than invest internally into this transition, into this transformation of their core business strategy. And secondly, often it's because they weren't able to tolerate the lower margins for a while. I mean, the two are of course related, like internal investments, like CapEx is a part of it, but also separately to CapEx, the impact on P&L, on profit and loss through the hit on the margins. Like, okay, well, for this, it was gonna be a new product line that was gonna be better for society or better for the environment. It's but we were gonna have to sell at a lower price point for a while to justify it, or the production cost was gonna be higher, so the margin was gonna be squeezed. And I'm just blown away at how many profitable ideas. None of these ideas I'm talking about are loss making. They're profitable, but they're not profitable enough, and they get shelved time and time again. I think there is, an entire sort of field full of amazing ideas that could have put us in a much better position vis-a-vis the ecological crisis we're in and the social crisis we're in, that never got pursued because the margin wasn't high enough. They had a positive margin, and that I keep emphasizing this because we look at the commercial side of things or the financial side of things as if it's binary. It's either loss making, it's going to turn us into a bankrupt business, or it's profit maximizing and allows us to give maximum returns to our investors. Those are two extremes. Like the actual world is in between those two, and when we demand only the solutions that pursue maximum returns, the entire rest of that spectrum gets shut out, and doesn't get followed, doesn't get pursued in the business world. So the ideas I'm seeing to overcome those sorts of boundaries are going to the heart of the design of the business. They're going into essentially the ownership model. So there's a different ownership model. That means that either owners have different rights, different expectations, and can put different barriers or boundaries in front of decision makers one way or another. The governance structure, which is incredibly connected to what I'm talking about, like who's on the board, what are the expectations, and what are the financial and other decision making models that are imposed and used in the business. The relationship with finance in terms of expectations of returns, of exits, of margins, the financial parameters, which again connected. So all of these are very connected to the business. And of course, there are other aspects of the deep design of business, the purpose of the business, and the networks as well. But especially when we get to the governance model, the ownership model, and the financial structures, you start realizing these are designed, these are human-made constructs. These are things that are enabling or holding back decision makers from pursuing the strategic directions that they want to pursue or they need to pursue. And that's where we need to roll up our sleeves and become redesigners of the business.
And that really brings to mind the lovely phrase that I've heard you use recently about the fact that we've designed a system where life is in service to finance instead of finance being in service to life. And I think that's just such a beautiful way of expressing it. And it's like, we've created these things called companies and businesses to do the things that we need to do together because we can't do them on our own. But we've forgotten what they're for, and all of a sudden we just think that they're profit maximizing machines, don't we? And that's the thing. It needn't be that way. That is a social construct that we impose on our businesses. So we can change that as well if we choose. And it's not really an if, is it? We have to change that. Businesses can't just be for profit.
Absolutely. And I think step one is recognizing how much we're held back by that paradigm, how much we can unleash the creativity, the innovation, the excitement of people across businesses, whether they're entrepreneurs or business leaders, or they're product designers and managers, or they're manufacturing workers or farmers, whatever it might be. The absolute singular obsession with maximum extraction for finance, and that finance being in service of itself, is limiting us. So step one is, I think, just recognizing that, and I try to emphasize that sometimes in my talks or workshops, and I'm sure so many like you and others in our community of practice do the same. And I think there is a bit of fear in confronting that, because if you work in and with business, to then acknowledge the limitation of this kind of enterprise design, it makes you seem potentially a bit financially and commercially naive. It makes you potentially seem like, oh, you sound a bit, and that's not business then, is it? If you're not maximizing for returns. And I think, I hear this even by people who want to do well, who say, look, when I talk as if there isn't, a financial case for this stuff in the old outdated mode of constructing a financial case, then I'm almost admitting to my peers I'm not as good at business as they are, because they're looking for ways to have their cake and eat it too. They're looking for ways to sort of maximize everything and look really savvy. Look how commercially, effective they are, and they're saving the planet and society. That's the guideline through which we measure success. To sort of say, hey, I'm going to look for the things that achieve lower returns, but still sufficient returns and fair returns, but lower returns, because by doing so, I'm going to be able to do things I otherwise can't do. I will be investing into products, services, manufacturing models, relationship structures, whatever it might be, that are going to be far more beneficial to people and to planet. That's a hard thing to say, and I think we almost need to be able to sit with that for a bit of going, so yeah, how does it feel that you might be judged by some of your peers, that you're not as good at profit maximizing as they are, because they're going to keep looking for only the ways to solve social and ecological problems where they also maximize returns for their investors. That's what's celebrated. That's what business schools teach. That's what society celebrates. That's what makes you bigger in the broader economy, and therefore more powerful and have a greater voice and influence. I think losing that is terrifying. So being able to kind of go, yes, I'm the entrepreneur who doesn't pursue that goal. I think the cultural shift in that is probably bigger than we've all acknowledged.
Definitely, and I think throughout this last bit of the conversation, what I've really been struck by is the tension that you're drawing between individuals and their agency and their institutions, the context in which they find themselves. And I think that's really reflective of this moment, isn't it? Because I think anyone who's attending to the bigger picture can see that the system is starting to fail, and it's never worked for everyone, but now it's starting to fail for everyone. So people can see that we need to do things differently, but we can be so constrained. But this can be a beautiful tension as well, can't it? Of finding ways to liberate people, and that again changes the nature of what business is, away from being this kind of extracting thing to this joyful thing, which is about celebrating life and being in service to life, and having ideas of community flourishing and cultural perpetuity, as opposed to just I'm going to squirrel away as much as I can and then pull up the drawbridge afterwards, because there are no drawbridges that we can pull up, are there?
No, I mean, yeah, you can become friends with the billionaires who seem to be creating a plan to go to Mars or inhabit some other planet. The other planets are pretty crappy. This is the really good one. This is, I mean, my God, isn't it wonderful? The balance of oxygen in the air, the way the soil works, the way the seas and the currents, and this is phenomenal. The way water is captured, fresh water is captured and comes down and allows us to use it, and this is the good one that we struck. This is the jackpot, and there is no way of drawing up the drawbridge, as you say. There is no way of being able to just look after yourself. I mean, yeah, I think that the currency of the future is going to be the relationships of trust that we build with each other, and ability to collaborate mutually, and that's our superpower, I think, as humans, and in the way we've created societies. And we do exhibit a lot of that, even in this model of our economic order, where we celebrate the individualistic, greedy, competitive side of ourselves exclusively. and we foster that exclusively, and we don't foster the other mutualistic, cooperative side of ourselves, the generous side of ourselves, but we exhibit it nonetheless, even though we're not incentivized to exhibit it. So imagine if we created models of business, finance, the broader economy that celebrated it, that encouraged it, that incentivized that side of mutualism and collaboration and generosity rather than the competitive, individualistic, greed-focused side of ourselves. Imagine the outcomes we could create.
And that's what this is all about, isn't it? And this conversation, the work that you're doing, the work that everyone is doing, trying to change direction, trying to move us towards that safe and just space for humanity. That's what this is all about, isn't it? It's trying to imagine that future and take steps to reach there.
It is.
In doing that, what do you think the biggest levers that we've not pulled are? Obviously, you've talked about finance. Is there anything else you want to talk about there? Are there any other levers that you see a need to start to pull?
So I think bringing in stakeholders that the relationship with whom are really important into design of the business feels really critical. So, models like putting nature on the board, models like putting farmers, workers, community representatives on the board of a company, models of co-ownership, where examples like Cafe Direct, where the farmers are co-owners of the business and have representatives alongside others who focus on the mission of the business. Examples of bringing in a mission lock that is going to make it much harder to pull a company away from its core purpose, like Tony's Chocolonely has done, by bringing in a mission lock of guardian shareholders that make it much harder for any future investor to divert Tony's away from his purpose of creating 100% slave-free chocolate, for instance. And across the world of employee ownership, cooperatives, social enterprise, we've been seeing different, innovative, diverse ways of generating the governance structure of a company to focus on the purpose and to focus on the voice and interests of a collection of different stakeholders. And I think in doing so, we do have to acknowledge we make it a bit messier. It's much simpler to focus only on the bottom line and to divert the bottom line to shareholders and investors in proportion to their capital. So if you're very rich, you own more shares, you get a bigger dividend check. If you're a tiny part of a pension fund, you get a much smaller dividend check. In every dividend season, that kind of gets rolled out and we exacerbate inequality. But that is a very simple way of running a business. It's a very singular way. And I think what we are trying to do here, people like you and I are trying to imagine and experiment and support ways of doing this where it's messier, but it's also more balanced. And because that's how the world is. There are so many competing stakeholders. We need to find a way to keep businesses pursuing different goals and balance different objectives alongside each other. And one more thing, Tim, sort of to add to that perspective that ties back to the last couple of points we've discussed, is that, in doing so, business leaders are, on the one hand, trying to hustle in this difficult competitive environment that we find ourselves in, difficult economy that we find ourselves all in, while trying to create a future economy and a future model. And I always find it helpful to acknowledge this is hard. Like if you're a business leader and you're being encouraged and pushed and pronged by people like Tim Freneau and Erinch Sahan on looking at new models of bringing circularity or fair trade or fair tax into your business, and then redesigning your company, we're essentially saying let's invent the new economy together. But we also need to acknowledge you are in this difficult situation of having to compete in this in often a cutthroat industry and market, whichever one you find yourselves in. And there is a tension there. There is a contradiction almost. So in our enthusiasm to create the new, I think it's helpful, and I've increasingly become more comfortable acknowledging this more openly. It is difficult for business leaders to hold both truths because these are different worlds, and and it is harder, but it's also the only way it's going to happen, because there won't be a switch that's flicked and suddenly we're in the new economy. It's going to be this messy sort of, like imagine a river where the salt water and the fresh water are mixing right by the seaside. I mean, that's where we're at. Like you've got to. And right now it's mostly the salt water if we're going to move from the sea into the lake. But as we move over, you're sort of having to deal with both kinds, and you're trying to foster the new kind while also dealing with the old kind of the business world as well. So I don't want to understate how difficult this is. It is difficult, but it's necessary, it's exciting, and it's definitely possible.
And it's what people want as well, whether they're in business or outside business. People want a future, don't they? And that's the fundamental thing. But I think you're absolutely right, is that we haven't got an environmental problem, we've got a behavior problem. So we have to recognize all of the behaviors within this and acknowledge, yeah, it's so hard. It really is so hard when we've got 400 years of learning that's told us that this is the way things work and this is how systems work, to start to unpack that. It's incredibly difficult. And I think you're absolutely right. The more balanced we can be in that awareness, I think the better. And I think that's why I always describe the pivot community as proactivists. So it's not saying we don't like something, it's saying we can do better. And here's how we can help you do better. And I think that ambition and generating a shared ambition to be better and to do better, for me, feels like the way through this. Because if we can't, then it is going to be worse, and it's not a nice place to get to. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a tough old gig, being a business leader at this moment. It's easy for us to stand on the sidelines and go, it needs to change. Being right in the heart of it, it's not even like turning around an oil tanker. It's like turning around an oil tanker that doesn't even have a rudder. It's so, this is what we do.
Yeah.
So, well, I'm going to leave it there, because for those of you joining the listening circle, we'll have loads of time to get into this. And hear from each other about where we're going with this. And for those of you who aren't joining the listening circle, thank you for joining us now. Erinch, thank you. It's been brilliant. I look forward to hearing where all of your work goes, where this takes us, and where we all go. Because, we need to go somewhere, and we need to start making that turn sooner rather than later. So
well, Tim, we're co-creating that journey together. You, me, and dozens of other people around the world that are both excited by and at the same time trying to champion these new ways of doing things and the diversity that's emerging. So yeah, thank you for all your inspiration and all your leadership across all of these ideas.
Thank you. Brilliant. Bye, guys.